Window's done. Yeah, this is so. Canadian women's national team just finished their two-game window, winning against Argentina 2-0, and then winning against Morocco 4-0. And I think, let's talk about it a little bit. I almost want to do this in an inverse way instead of just, no, we're just going to do it from this. Look at the whole window as a nutshell, and then kind of talk about how everyone's doing, like a reverse ranking, so to speak, right? So let's just kind of go real quick through this. The players in the camp, players who you maybe wish you could have seen a little bit more are, incomplete. The incomplete players, players you saw little if nothing from. Serge Gakis, the Cian Pro. Honestly, there's only 2 games, so you're only going to get those 2 games playing. From a goalkeeper standpoint, we saw Sabrina D'Angelo get the start against Morocco, and she had maybe 2 saves in the game. But good that we got her on the pitch. But then Serge Gakis truly just kind of lets me know where she is on the depth chart. I mean, brought in and couldn't even get a minute. So we know where she is on the depth chart then. For all you Gakis fans, that's kind of where it is. So those 2 players, not incomplete. Would have liked to see more, but I don't think we're going to see that from there. I think it's becoming a little bit clearer in terms of who the overall pool of players will be. And I think that will get interesting, especially as we start to gear up to the winter months, right? Especially November and then February. By then, the NWSL will be out, so you'll have to look at some European players just to have informed players, or you have to rely on them, the federation, to run longer camps. Which is more likely? That's the question. You know what? With that out of the way, let's kind of look at this from a position standpoint over the weekend. So let's look at where they have players. And again, we'll go by what we have on the list. You have the defenders. I think if you look at fullback specifically, you didn't have your top 2. And I think the interesting question to come out here would be, is Janine Becky your number 3 fullback? And is that something you're comfortable with? Because I think, just based off of the 2 games that I watched, and I could be wrong here, but I think delivery-wise, between Chapman, BSG, and Becky, I liked Becky's delivery the best. Now, granted, that's just a product of Becky being a winger and doing a whole lot of things, but I liked her delivery a little bit more than that. And if she's your number 3, that makes a lot of interesting conversations. But in terms of the fullbacks, you had Suriak, who played a little bit against Argentina. Again, better as a fullback, not as a center back. You have Bianca St. George's, played well. Nothing as well as Lisa Chapman, played well. So nothing more. I think interesting if you're looking at the roster from the standpoint of who can play where. I would do wonder if, because you have some flexibility with Becky, and when you start thinking about World Cup numbers, especially since we haven't officially heard if we're going 26 or 23, but if you can get 26, if you get 23, do you maybe cut down on a fullback knowing you can play Becky back there? That's an interesting question for me. I wonder if you do that, and then in doing so, that allows you to maybe go a little bit heavier in another position, and we'll go from there. But that's a question I have. Comes to center backs. Buchanan played all right. St. George's, Zadorsky played well, and Jada Rose played well. Against Morocco, you moved out Zadorsky in and took out Buchanan, which I think was the right move for the game. I think for passing out from the back, both fullbacks were a little bit shaky in the first half. And we're just giving Morocco opportunities to counter versus, being pressured into it. So I think from that standpoint, you have to ask yourself who your center backs are. And I think it's very clear. And once Vanessa Gilles is back, those are your 4. I don't know if there's a 5th center back. And maybe that's the question that we start to look at and say, who can play there? Yes, you have players who can play out there, but that doesn't mean that you're good as a center back, right? You need a little bit of height. You miss the height that Zadorsky and Gilles have and Rose has. Again, on a side joke note, Rose and Buchanan are both 6'2", so it doesn't really matter. So that's coming there. When it comes to your midfield, I think the midfield is where it gets interesting. I mean, you have Simi Awujo, Zoe Burns, Flemings, Grosso, Quinn, Schmidt, and Scott. And I think it's a bit of a semantic question. I've seen some people putting their rosters out there and asking, well, this is who we think. Is Sinclair a striker or a forward or a midfielder? Because I think she's a midfielder at this point in her career. I think the furthest up you want her would be as a 10. Now, granted, maybe over the offseason she's able to recover a bit, rehab a bit, and she looks better for the World Cup. But I don't know if you want her as a striker, which then means, again, a semantic conversation. If she's a midfielder, the midfield is starting to get very crowded. I mean, we know the forwards are getting crowded, but the midfield is starting to look very crowded. I mean, who are you leaving off? Awujo, Burns, Fleming, Grosso, Quinn, Schmidt, and Scott. Realistically, if you're gonna put Sinclair in the midfield, the name that's more than likely dropping is Burns, right? Zoe didn't have a lot of time to show. Played because we're missing players as a fullback. Yes, she's versatile, gives you that ability, but if Sinclair, you're looking at her as a midfielder, right? If you're looking at her as a midfielder, then more than likely you're dropping Burns and putting Sinclair there. Then you have a midfield of Awujo, Fleming, Grosso, Quinn, Schmidt, Scott, and Sinclair. I do wonder though, and this is always going to be a question with Scott, when do you maybe start to begin that process? I think the thing we learned this window in the midfield especially is that you almost have to match it stylistically, right? As much as Grosso and Fleming are more than likely the future holdings, are runners of the midfield, if you're going back 3, if you're going a 4-4-2, however you're looking at it, there's also a reality where sometimes matchup wise, as Quinn offers more in terms of penetrating, especially when you're playing teams against low blocks. The good thing about these two games is that these are two teams you're going to be playing at the World Cup. Two styles of teams like that, pot 3, pot 4 type teams. And you're going to have to break down some low blocks, which means you're going to have to make them defend you and go from there. So a Quinn sometimes matches up better for breaking into a low block than sometimes Grosso and Fleming. They'll get there. They're both still young in their careers. They can definitely develop that and probe in a little bit more. And I think you could definitely use that. But it does also, I wonder when it comes to some of the vets, and I know Schmidt played well, Scott put in her shift, Quinn still there, Sinclair, amongst others. You have to start asking yourself, do you start this process or not? I don't know if right now in the midfield there's enough players for you to have a serious conversation about Desiree Scott not being a part of the final roster. But if some of those players start to push, right? If Strategakis starts to push up, if Pickett starts to push a little bit more, even if Zoe Burns, especially look at more of a Pickett because she has played everywhere in the midfield, whether that's as a holding, whether that's as a 10, whether that's as an 8. Until those players start to push, you can't really have the conversation and say, who would you rather have? The only way you can really have the conversation is if you say, Sinclair maybe is a midfielder, and we, numbers-wise, maybe we drop a player. But again, based off this roster, more than likely, the player who gets dropped is Zoe Burns. But yeah, I think definitely Quinn, Loki has been playing well. Player of the match against Argentina. And then, played well in the first half against Morocco. But it's definitely a conversation to have there when you get to the forward/wingers/strikers. I mean, Becky's utility. Becky's not on this team. Becky had a good window, to be perfectly honest. So, Becky had a good window. Haidema didn't have a bad window. I think when it comes to Haidema, she really didn't get that much service against Argentina. But there's also an aspect where, what she does well right now, you almost want a player like her to be a little bit on on aerial balls, you want her to be a little bit more of a bully, right? And, we haven't been able to see it yet. That doesn't mean that she doesn't have that in her, but you almost want her to be a little bit more of a bully, just attacking the ball. And I think there's a bit of a degree where you see the difference between that and how Évelyne Viens played, right? On the goals that she creates or puts away. And you see her attacking a little bit more on that ball, finding the space and getting there. Not to say that Heidemann wasn't doing that. Again, she didn't have the crosses or the opportunities, but you'd almost want her to be a little bit more bad uses of words. We're gonna flip that. We want her to be a little bit more aggressive on getting on the other end of those crosses. And I think everything else in their game is progressing well, but also it's the style of team that you're playing. I think Heidemann and Grosso, and to an extent Fleming. I mean, Fleming can play. They could all play, but I think I look at those two, Heidemann and Grosso, playing teams that are actually going to go back and forth, where the pitch is a little bit wider and more open. That type of a game suits those two players. Whereas playing a team that's in a low block really does put them in a disadvantage, because opening it up, movement, things like that, a more transition, a more up and down fluid type game suits those players a little bit better. And you're going to play two games like you've played here in that World Cup, so finding the right type of movement could work. Heidemann could still have a very good win. She could still have a good World Cup, but I think matchups matter, and I think with Grosso it also came in here, kind of bringing it back. Lacasse finally looking more dangerous. I mean, the goal is one thing, but if we're honest, she has been creating opportunities. She just hasn't been able to finish them against teams. She was finally able to put one away. And I think with Lacasse, she has to start putting chances away, because right before she scored, I was thinking to myself, is the tweet like, you can only miss so many chances before we start to question if you're just going to miss? But she put it away, and then she had the great turn against Morocco, saved by the keeper. And that was good to see. I think Lacasse, more than likely, just based off the start she gets, the movement. I mean, Lacasse was definitely a player at CONCACAF W, or I asked myself, why didn't she get more run, especially into the other games when you lost Deanne Rose and other players. But yeah, it's a coach. Clarissa Lyricey, I wish she'd play as a 9, but I guess Bev's trying to simplify the game and keep her out wide as a wing. And if you do that, especially with the injury to Deanne Rose, it's not a bad move. Scored her first goal coming off the wing. And I think she's definitely improving her stock. The fact she's got 2 straight call-ups definitely does show the fact that she is, on the radar and she's there. Leon and Prince, I mean, Prince was active. Leon, just protect your shins. I mean, the Argentina game was tough and very physical, but when it comes to actually play on the pitch, Leon had a few opportunities that she wasn't able to put away, but I think how Leon is playing, there's just no fear with her moving forward. Then Prince wasn't bad, but she definitely had pockets of moments. But with a player like Prince, you need space for her, right? And that's where movement, attacking, essentially a low block, you need more players who are going to do that. I think a Quinn type player opens it up, and against Morocco, once you scored 1 goal, the game opened up a little bit more. Then once they got the second one, then you saw Prince creating opportunities for herself and her teammates moving around. Still would like to see a little bit more on that final product, but I think for where she is, I think wingers are definitely where it is. Évelyne Viens, I mean, a goal, an assist, created an own goal. Like, there's nothing that she could have done more other than scoring, 18 braces, which is impossible. But Viens definitely shows how her game is different from Heidemann, and especially when you're playing teams in tight spaces, finding the space, and that's something that she did very well. She found space, maximized herself in them, and when she had chances, she was able to convert a chance or two out of the other ones. And coming from a team where we ask ourselves who's going to score the goals, And then we said, well, who other than Adrian Leon's going to score the goals? I think her form of scoring goals, some players just have a knack for finding a space, right? Like striker's intuition, we called it that, where you just can find yourself at the right place at the right time, or your movement gets you into the right place that helps you create an opportunity. So overall, not a bad window for them. I know Bev has talked about maybe November getting some games. I've heard rumors of like a Brazil. Doesn't really matter. Important dates to note. Depending on when you're watching this, the FIFA U17s for women are going on. The Canada is going to be playing during that, so make sure you check the schedule for that. And also, this Friday. Yeah, this Friday is the draw for the Intercontinental Playoff. As again, depending on when you're watching this, the European playoffs would have just finished up. So, yay team for qualifying. Or, aw team, I wish you would have made it. And then the draw for the Women's World Cup is the 22nd of October. So at that point, you'll know when it is. And that's why I've said, for the most part, I think teams are really going to wait till last minute. Unless you're a top team, which it doesn't really matter. I think Canada, their best bet is looking, I know they have their tier 1, 2, and 3s, and I'm still trying to figure out what that qualifies as. But they also have pot 2 teams, which is where they'll be. Teams like Spain, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, or Korean Republic. Teams like that they can play and set up where it won't really matter because they won't be playing those teams in their groups. And those won't be bad teams to play. But again, you have England, you have Australia, you have France. That's why I've been saying also France, the Netherlands, and Sweden are like my top 3 teams that I'd like them to get friendlies with, because they're the only teams in pot 1 that they haven't played. But guys, what did you think about this window? Who impressed you in the window? Let me know in the comments below. Also, who would you like to see groups? If your team's going to the World Cup, who would you want to see in your group just for fun matchups or best or toughest matchups? When it comes to Morocco, I'm going to leave off with this saying, I think it's great that Canada played Morocco, but I tweeted this. I would have loved this game to be in Morocco. I don't know why there aren't more friendlies that happen in Africa. It's kind of a bit of an annoying thing to me because I feel they can pull it off, and plus that type of environment would be a lot better and builds the actual profile for the game in those countries versus having to go somewhere and playing in an empty stadium where the only fan you hear is a baby crying. Anyways, I'm done rambling now. Let me know what you think.